One of my favorite board games of all time is Talisman, so I thought I would do a little comparative review and analysis of the different versions of the game that have been released over the years. This is Talisman's second edition, the box you see before you. There was a first edition, obviously, and it was identical to the second edition, except the first edition had a different box cover, and the cards in the game were in black and white instead of being in color like these adventure cards are. This is the main game board for Talisman second edition, with the outer region, middle region, and the innermost region that you have to adventure through. There's many expansions. Well, there were 6 expansions for Talisman second edition. The first one was called, appropriately enough, Talisman the Expansion. What that did is it added some new characters, some new adventure cards to the adventure card deck, and a few new spells, I believe. The adventure card deck is really what drives it. The game, so there's quite a few in this particular edition when you add in all the expansions. The next expansion was called Talisman the Adventure, and that added these character sheets. It added these 6 cards here that you could put down over the Crown of Command so that when you get there you'd flip it up and hopefully not get sucked into the horrible black void if you encounter the Pit Fiend. Added these character sheets, which when we first got it, we were like, oh wow, this is great, these are neat, and then kind of stopped using them after a while. They take up a lot of space on the table. And then there was the dungeon expansion. Some of the adventure cards would be dungeon entrances, and then you would go to the separate board and adventure around through here. When you get to the middle, you roll a die, and if you roll a 6, you'd get to go boom to the Crown of Command, and that's what you need to get to win the game. So it could happen on your first turn. You get lucky, you find a dungeon entrance, roll a couple 6s, get to the middle, roll a 6 again, and then wow, the game's over quick. The next one was Talisman Timescape, where it sort of brought the 40K universe into the fantasy setting. Here you could journey around the galaxy and whatnot. It's probably the most maligned expansion. It added space marines and scientists and stuff. I really like the Timescape, so probably take some flack for that. The next one to come along was the City expansion, which it took this board, this section of the board here, the City, and expanded it to its own mini board. It also added some upgrade characters that you would, like your character could become the Master Thief or the High Mage if you could fulfill certain requirements. I really like the concept of the city, journeying around it, but I felt that you would think that it would broaden your options with all these other expansions, when the reality of it was it really lessened your options, because the High Mage was so powerful that it was a quest to see who could get to the city and give them a magic object up first at the guild or whatever, so that they could become the High Mage. And then the last expansion was a card-only expansion, Talisman Dragons. It was a bunch of new cards for the adventure deck, and then it added a different end game where the Dragon King here, whose strength 12 was the Crown of Command space. Since the whole game is driven by the adventure cards, one of the problems with it is that if you get a whole bunch of high-strength dragons out early on, cluttering up the board, it can increase the lethality of it. The game itself came with just these stand-ups to represent the characters. At the time, you could also get the lead miniatures that you could buy for all the different characters in the game, but this is the default. And it just had these little chits to represent gold and lives and strength and whatnot. So then came Talisman 3rd edition. This is also made by Games Workshop. They went with a bit more cartoony style on this one. Had the main game board, and there were 3 expansions released for this. One of them was the dungeon, which also came with the smaller board for the opposite corner for the mountains. And then there was the City of Adventure, which had the city board, and then it also came with the forest. And lastly was the Dragon's Tower expansion, which is this 3D tower that sits in the board. This expansion also came with a huge plastic dragon that's supposed to sit right here. It serves no purpose other than to just sit there. It doesn't do anything in the game. It's one of the miniatures that you could use for your Warhammer Fantasy Battle to put your general on fly around and stuff. So I've never used it in the game because, like I said, it serves really no purpose. The thing I didn't really like about this expansion, well, I felt that the Dragon's Tower was necessary because here's what you had before. The Wizard's Tower, and there would be 5 cards that were always the same 5 cards that you just progress through in order to get to the end game. Very anticlimactic. The thing I don't like about this is if you're sitting in the middle of the board, it's hard to see across. So when we play, we always kind of move it off to the side there. The second edition, when you add in all the expansions, and there was a couple characters and upgrade characters, thinking of White Dwarf, you're around 63, 64 characters, I forget. Here, when you add in the expansions, and then there was some more characters in White Dwarf, and then there's a lot of homebrewed characters out there. You're with the official characters, it's like maybe 33, 34 different characters. I can't remember off the top of my head, but you'd have these. These are the character cards here, and then they added, instead of the little cardboard chits, you had these cones, and then the gold were these nice little gold coins, and then this game came with miniatures for all the characters, not a cardboard stand-up. They'd give you a GW miniature. If you've played Warhammer Fantasy, I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of them. I thought they were great for crossover. So I could use them in my fantasy army and then also play the game with them. So this is the 3rd edition. Then Black Industries, which my understanding is they're a subsidiary of the Black Libraries, a subsidiary of Games Workshop, published the game. I'm not going to spend too much time with that to show you the box here. They kind of went back. It's more of a redo of 2nd edition. They abandoned 3rd edition. This is out for a little bit before Fantasy Flight Games got the rights to it. If you notice, it's almost the same exact cover. This is the Fantasy Flight version that I'm going to show you now. You've got back to the 2nd edition style board. You've got the Crown to Command in the middle. There's an inner region that you have to go through. With this one, you've got character cards, and it comes with plastic miniatures. You've got the coin and the cones like the 3rd edition. One new mechanic they added are fate tokens, which allow you to spend a fate token to reroll. And they've come out with a Reaper expansion for this one already, which is cards and a little Reaper character that moves around, a few more characters. And then they just came out with the Dungeon expansion. And I know it's going to be hard for me to kind of get this whole thing into perspective with the Dungeon. It occupies a corner like the Dungeon did in 3rd edition, and I guess I'm hopeful that I'm going to see an expansion for each other corner. I don't know what I'm going to do about table space when we have all that, but this is the newest thing that's out. And to just kind of give you a perspective, I mean, I thought back when I was playing 2nd edition that it took up a lot of table space. Then there's 3rd edition and the amount of table space it takes up, and the revised 4th edition hasn't really even begun to show us what all it can do with its expansions. And there you go. Do I like one a lot more than any of the others? No, I routinely kind of break them all out and play through them all. If I had to pick one as maybe my least favorite, man, it's hard. It probably have to say 3rd would be the least favorite. I really like 2nd. The thing with 2nd edition is there's just so much that's out there and so many different things. I think everybody who plays this regularly probably has adapted their own set of house rules to handle certain situations or certain really powerful characters or combos. Whereas in the 4th edition, they've taken all that into consideration and really ironed it out. Things like Psionic Blast or the Monk's ability, it only adds your starting craft value and not your current just total net craft. So I think that Fantasy Flight's done a really good job with it, and I look forward to seeing what else they come out with. Speaking of the adventure cards driving things, that's how many adventure cards there are now. The first pack is these spell cards. But I mean, if you look at the dungeon board, I mean, that's just the dungeon cards. So there's a lot going on there and a lot of spaces to interact with. So there you have it. There's the brief history of the Talisman games, and hope you'd enjoy it and go play some Talisman.